Hello, Sabina Brennan here, host of Superbrain, the podcast for everyone with a brain. It takes just 30 seconds on Google or Apple Pay to make a one-off donation to support this show. Simply follow the Support This Show link in the show or episode description. Cheers.
Don't let things pass you by.
I try to live for the future.
We're stronger together.
This is Journeys Through Pulmonary Fibrosis, sharing heartwarming and courageous stories from people affected by a rare lung condition. Listen for free on your favourite podcast app.
Hello and welcome to Superbrain, the podcast for everyone with a brain. My name is Sabina Brennan, and this week I continue my conversation with the super resilient Hilary Freeman. Enjoy and be kind. We started social media, it started up and it was a huge phenomenon because it gave the voiceless a voice.
Yeah.
Now the voiceless have become the powerful.
Yes.
And they have the power to do terrible things to individuals. They can become judge, jury.
Yeah.
It actually is almost the opposite of democracy. But I actually, for the first time in my life in the last few years, I have started to self-censor on social media.
Yeah, it does make you self-censor, and that's not a healthy thing.
No, it's not good. And you're a journalist. Your job is to give opinion and to start conversation and to actually, present the other side of something.
Yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't have to be your opinion. It can be just here's the other side.
Yes, exactly. And I've talked to other journalist friends, and we all feel the same, that our job has changed because 10 years ago or 15 years ago, you could write a column or an article and it was tomorrow's fish and chip paper.
Yes.
Now, it's never tomorrow's fish and chip paper. If you Google my name now, some of the first things that still come up are about that obesity article, which is now, that was 2.5 years ago.
And actually that's that thing with Janine Sacco. She doesn't have a voice. So you were able to replace, because you continue to work and continue to write articles and to write books. And so there's other information, replacing that.
Yes.
This girl was denied her voice, her job, everything. And still now, I believe it's, hundreds of pages before you get anything else about her. She actually, one thing she said is that she says, I just feel I lost myself. This is not who I am. I am not a racist. I never have been. No. I made one tweet and my entire life up to that has been erased.
Yeah.
And
she's been defined by that.
Yeah, she's been defined by that. And she kind of said, I often think if I was in an accident and lost my memory and I came back, I'd say, oh, what a horrible person I am. This is who I am. And that's why I was interested. I was drawn to, you've written a lot of books about young adults.
Yes.
And one of your books, and it's for young adults, but I'm actually dying to read it. I've kind of only read the outside of it. When I Was Me.
Yes.
Kind of, I know it goes on to quantum issues, but it kind of explores some of that. Would you like to kind of tell us a little bit about that, about identity? And
yes. So it's about a girl who wakes up one morning and everything is not right. Her room doesn't look right. She realizes that her appearance is slightly different. Her mother's appearance is different. Her parents are suddenly back together even though they were divorced, and she starts to question whether she's going mad or whether she's in a dream. She doesn't know what's going on, and she goes to school and realizes that her friends are not the people that were her friends, and that her best friend just blanks her and isn't interested in talking to her, and she's actually friends with these two people that she would never have been friends with before, and it's the book is looking at identity, really. I think it's a kind of metaphor for what all teenagers go through, which is trying to find their identity. Who am I? What makes me who I am? Is it my experiences? Is it other people? Is it my peers? Am I the way I am because I'm friends with this person? And then all the moments in life that can make a difference. One little meeting can have a huge impact on the rest of your life. it's an exploration of identity.
Yeah,
really.
and that's kind of interesting, and I mean, it's interesting from a brain perspective because in a way your brain creates your identity.
Yeah.
And it creates it from various aspects of your life.
Yeah.
Some of it is from, life experience, etc. Obviously there'll be traits, etc. But there will be things that other people said about you.
Yes.
And your identity is kind of constructed.
Yes.
And in a way, with social media, it allows people construct a new identity that has no consequences.
Yes.
But it also can actually change other people's identity by labeling them something that they're not. So it's really kind of messing around.
Exactly. And actually in the book, when she goes to find her social, because she goes on her social media and all her pages have disappeared and she doesn't exist on social media, and that's a huge shock for her because she's documented her life on there and suddenly that's not there anymore, so she doesn't know who she is.
And you see, that's kind of interesting because the amount of the selfie culture, when I grew up, cameras were something that were maybe taken out at Christmas time or on holidays or a religious event or a rite of passage, and you were very lucky if one photograph came out. Do you know that was usable or wasn't blurred? And so our sense of self was very much sort of created by other people, by how we reacted to that, and our image of ourselves was very much in our head. And I would often look in a mirror and kind of go, oh God, is that what I really look like? It's almost like hearing your voice on radio or something for the first time. You go, oh, is that what I sound like? Because we hear it differently in our own heads. But now there's this whole society where actually, as you've just explored in that book, where this is who I am my whole life. I can look back and I can see, oh, look at me 10 years ago, and go, oh, that's what I was like 10 years ago. No, actually, that's not what you were like 10 years ago. That's the best photo you could pick out from that day 10 years ago. But it's not what you were like 10 years ago.
And I find it very interesting that I've got a 4-year-old daughter, and selfies were there before she was born, and she has, she will come onto my laptop and sit on my lap and say, take a photo, mummy, take a photo, and we'll take a photograph of the two of us together. And then she'll see my Facebook, if I'm on Facebook and she comes over, she'll see a picture of herself coming up on my Facebook memories. I want to see more photos of me as a baby, mummy. Show me photos of me in your tummy. And she's, for her, we've got thousands of photos of her. Whatever she does, she puts on a dress and says, oh, let me take a photo on my phone. I mean, it's terrible. I know. I'm probably creating either a terrible narcissist or someone who's going to have awful image problems,
I don't know what it is. It's kind of really, we're going to kind of have to wait and see, what actually happens. And I do it. I want photographs. I do it. And I do remember being a child. I was the 5th of 5 children. So actually, even though photos were relatively rare, my parents got professional photographs taken of my older siblings, but by the time it came to me, Anna, we've been there, done that. So there's hardly any photos of me as a kid. So I do remember that. God, I'd like to see. There's kind of something. I think that's inherently human. What do I look like, or is that me? Or I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But we've kind of distorted it. I am interested in that whole identity, and I was curious, did you feel, and I think you've even sort of half answered it, that did you feel when you went through that social media vilification or social media shaming that you lost yourself, or were you very strong? I mean, I think you're quite a resilient individual.
I am resilient. I have been through a lot of fairly difficult things in my life, traumatic events, and I think I have got quite a lot of resources to deal with stuff. I don't feel like I lost myself. I felt like people didn't understand who I was, and that was upsetting. But that people were judging me as something I wasn't, and that I felt like I was powerless to explain to people, this is what I really mean and this is who I really am. And of course I don't hate people because of their size, and so I felt wrongly labelled, but I don't think I lost myself. No.
Yeah, and I mean that's really sort of speaks to the fact that you have a sense of yourself. And I wonder, you mentioned, and I hope you don't mind, tell me if you do mind if I talk, but you'd mentioned that you had lost your daughter. She's a beautiful name, and I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it.
Elodie.
Elodie.
Yes.
Elodie. It's a beautiful name.
Yeah. So I was pregnant with my first baby, very much wanted baby, who was planned, and the pregnancy all the way through there was something not quite right, but the doctors didn't know what, and it took until I was 23 weeks pregnant before they realised that she had a severe chromosome disorder, a very rare one, of which there have only been 5 live births in the world in medical literature, all of whom have terrible disabilities and problems. I was told that if I made it through the pregnancy, the chances are she would be born very, very prematurely. My placenta was affected by the condition as well, and the chances were that I would go into labour at about 20-something weeks, and she would be hooked up to every machine in the hospital, and then she would die in pain. The chances of her having any kind of a life were almost nil. And I spoke to geneticists and doctors, and I had not even a couple of weeks, I had about a week to think about what to do. But everybody advised me that I should terminate my pregnancy. And so I made the decision to do that, which is the hardest decision I've ever made in my life, because, she was kicking inside me. Oh. She was 23, 24 weeks by the time. And I felt very strongly after going through this that I really wanted to talk about it as a journalist. I felt an obligation to do it because very few women talk about having late terminations. I didn't know what it involved before I had to go through it. I didn't realise that I would have to... I don't know if you want me to go into the...
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, no, I'm...
Basically, you have to have an injection through your belly into the baby's heart to stop the heart, which is awful. Then you have to walk around with a dead baby inside you for 2 days. Then you go back into the hospital, you're induced, and you go through a full labour and childbirth. So it's horrible mentally, emotionally, physically, in every way. You're in a maternity unit in the hospital, so even though you're in a separate room,
surrounded by babies,
you can hear babies crying, and you walk out of there without your baby, and you get to have some photographs taken with your holding your baby, and then the baby's taken away, and it's awful, and the guilt that you feel because you have made this decision to do this, and you feel. So I just felt very much like I needed to write about this. I've always been very, very much pro-choice, but this was something different. This was something more.
Is writing cathartic for you? Is it something that you've always turned to?
Yes. For me, I don't know if this is healthy. I suppose it is healthy because I'm still sane. But the way that I've always deal with things is almost by slightly detaching myself from them, by writing them as I'm going through them. I'm imagining the words I'm going to use, the paragraphs. I sometimes even become like a character in one of my own books.
Right.
And that's how way I've always dealt with very traumatic things. It's almost a sort of they become part of my writing, and I'm writing them in my head, and that's how I'm dealing with them. And I find that incredibly cathartic. And so I wrote an art. I was asked actually by a friend at a paper, because I'd talked about what had happened to me on social media. Because I didn't feel like I should be ashamed of it. I felt I wanted to help other women, because to make their decision as well, to understand, for other people to understand the reality of what you go through.
I wasn't aware of, what you described there. And I mean, that's heart-wrenching. And I can't imagine. Like 2 days, it must have felt like an eternity.
It's just horrible. It's absolutely horrible because, and to... I did feel, and I've got to be careful kind of to talking about terms like this, but I did feel like I'd murdered my child. Yeah. Not in a kind of sense of I did anything wrong, but I had chosen to end her life, and I didn't want to do that. And so you're dealing with the loss of a child, a stillbirth, and also the fact that you've made that decision. And then I had to choose her clothes I had to choose her clothes that she was going to be buried in. I mean, she was cremated. I had to have a funeral. I had to choose the music for her funeral. And this is a baby that I very much wanted. So I really wanted to talk about it. So I agreed. I was approached by a friend who asked me if I would write something. It was quite soon after it had happened, and I agreed to do it. And I wrote it, and it was incredibly cathartic. It did help me a lot. They did turn off the comments on the article, which obviously I'd asked them to do, and they agreed to do. They knew how sensitive this subject was. But, of course, this is the thing we didn't really say before. Even if people don't comment on your particular article, even if you make your social media private, they can still find you in other ways. And people were sending me emails.
Really?
And I had an email. There was one, but mainly it was from. There were a lot of emails from staunch Catholics. Mm-hmm. Some of them were kind of like, "We're going to pray for you because you've sinned, but we can save you," which I didn't particularly appreciate. Not being Catholic myself, but at least they weren't nasty. At least they weren't being nasty. But some of them were really like, you are a murderer, you are evil. One of them was framed in such a way that it was a bit bizarre, and it said things like, you are evil, you are a murderer, you need to listen to classical music was one of the things it said. I mean, it's just bizarre, this list of things. And it made me so angry that it was funny, and I actually put it up on my Facebook profile as a picture. Just to sort of like an up yours. If you're going to tell me, how dare you tell me that you think this? It's none of your business. But yes, so even when I was doing something like that, I had a lot of social media criticism.
Backlash. I came across one, and I'm not sure if this is the actual article, but I know I felt incredibly moved when I read it, because and this may have been another article. It was about the fact that you were all set for a 9-month pregnancy, and then it's not there anymore. And do you mind if I read a little from it? And you were talking about how life had been full of hope and excitement of what was to come, and then you have a line, now it feels aimless. The loss of a baby is the theft of the future, the death of potential. It isn't measurable or definable. How do you miss or mourn something you never really had? Yet I do. My grief isn't rational. It's a raw biological pain. I am grieving for my chance to offer love, to nurture, to teach and to play. I'll never put Elodie's scribbles up on my fridge, drop her off at school, meet her friends. I'll never learn what she could have offered the world. I mean, I just found that so incredibly moving. And I just think that aside from all the horrible people who make nasty comments, writing like that has to touch other people who've lived through that.
I hope so. That's why.
And help.
That's one of, yes, I do it. Of course, I do it for myself as well. I do it because it's cathartic, but I do it because I want to convey what that experience is like to people who don't understand, and for people who have been through it, so that they know that they're not on their own. And actually, through writing these articles, I actually have made a few friends, people who contacted me who'd been through something similar, and who I got talking to, and then of course, because of social media, you then become part of their lives, because you keep up a dialogue and you become friends.
Shared, and I do think that's important when people experience something traumatic, to have people who, because it's only other people who have been through that who really, really know that. The rest of us can empathise, but there is strength in that. And in another one of these podcasts, we talked to Sinead Moriarty. She's also a writer, actually, but she was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and she said part of her recovery was actually, she had sort of isolated herself, and in fact felt that she had lost herself in a sense, but she said really her bouncing back and her resilience was actually when she started to speak with other people who had the same diagnosis, because she felt they understood. And so I think there's huge power in that. You also, as you touched on earlier, you have been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. You're very fortunate in that whilst you do have some symptoms, they're not as as debilitating, shall we say, as some of the symptoms that other people experience.
I'm very, very lucky. I've had MS since I was diagnosed in 1997, so that's 22 years. And I'm still mobile. It doesn't affect my day-to-day life. I do have symptoms, but I'm very, very lucky.
But you talk about the time of your diagnosis, about how that actually felt a little bit, and it had echoes to me in terms of one of the other podcasts about seeing your future change.
Yes, I mean, that for me, that's been the hardest thing is the effect on my identity. So from being, I was 25 when I was diagnosed, and being a 25-year-old, I think I just started out in my career, I just met somebody, my whole life was about, this is my future, it's going to be great, to I've got an incurable illness that at the time I thought could leave me disabled very quickly, unable to do my job, unable to do anything, and ultimately, I would die in a horrible fashion, very slowly and painfully. That's what I thought. So suddenly see yourself to go from a well person. And I'd always been quite healthy. I'd never really had lots of illnesses as a child, never had allergies or anything like that, to suddenly being, oh my God, I'm a sick person. And then when it doesn't develop in the way that you think, which is fantastic, you feel guilty because people say, oh, you've got MS, people say, oh, you're so brave, you never talk about it. How do you cope? It's amazing. I'm like, well, I don't really have to cope with anything. That's why I'm not amazing at all. That's why, I'm okay. So I don't really have to deal with it most of the time. And also feeling guilty when I'm with other people with MS, because I'm like, well, I don't really have what you have, but I've got the same disease, but it doesn't affect me like you.
But you do, and for some reason you're resilient to the impact of the lesions that appear in the brain, and that's really interesting from a couple of aspects. But the main one being that if we can understand how people like you are resilient, that perhaps, and it may well be. I mean, we know that some lifestyle factors can help stave off certainly some of the more cognitive symptoms.
Yes.
A lot of people think MS is about losing mobility and ending up in a wheelchair, but some of the most debilitating symptoms actually affect your ability to function and memory, and so would be hugely debilitating for you as a writer.
Well, interesting you say that. I do have some memory issues, and I don't know whether they're to do with my MS or they're just to do with the fact that I've got 12 billion things I have to keep in my brain at the same time, and I'm also don't sleep very much, and I'm stressed and anxious, and who knows. Funnily enough, before I came earlier, I was looking at my book, and I suddenly thought, I couldn't remember that my character was called Ella. I never remember my character's names. I'm terrible at names. It's embarrassing. I don't know, and I don't know again if that's to do with the MS or what.
It's probably a combination, given that you're not sleeping, and stressed and multiple things. But clearly, aside from being resilient to the disease, you're clearly a very resilient individual in terms of all of the terrible things really that you've had, that many people would have struggled with just dealing with one of those things. And I just wonder whether you have any tips that you can share with listeners, either specifically, around being resilient, or specifically around social media, and if people are nasty, for people to take away.
I mean, in general terms, in terms of coping with things, I think it's incredibly important to talk about how you feel. If you're lucky enough to have friends and family that you can talk to and trust and confide in, that's really important. But even if you don't, just writing it down, even if no one's going to see it, just to get it out, I think that's that. I mean, I'm a writer, so that's my kind of knee-jerk way of dealing with everything. But even if you're not, just to kind of get it out really does help to sort of give you that slight distance from it, so it's not eating you up, and it helps you to sort of put it in perspective and maybe in a way sort of analyse it a little bit as well. And I think as far as social media is concerned, what I would say is, I mean, I know that when it was at its peak with the criticism and the nastiness, I actually did shut it down for a month. I just needed a break from it. And I thought I'd miss it like crazy, and I didn't actually miss it half as much as I thought I would. And I had so much more time to do things like reading that I never have time to do. And so I think, walking away sometimes is very important, but don't just internalize it all. You need to talk about it. You need to deal with it.
So why do you stay? Is it because it's part and parcel of your job, really? You have to be in touch with what people are doing and thinking, or...
Yeah, it's partly that. I mean, I don't tweet very much. I'm on Twitter, but I don't like Twitter. I like Facebook because I like discussions and debate, and you can go backwards and forwards, and you can see a long thread. Whereas on Twitter, I find that it feels like shouting into the wind, and I don't like the format of it, and the fact that people don't have long debates and discussions. But no, I say on social media, I'm an extrovert. I need to talk to people, and as a journalist, sometimes I'm talking to people, but a lot of the time I'm not. I'm on my own in a room typing, and I need that back and forth. It's how I get my ideas from talking to people. I'm a very reactive person. I don't, I need that to and fro. After my divorce, before my partner moved to England from France to live with me, I was on my own for about 9 months. And so working from home, living alone. And there were days where I wouldn't see anybody. If I hadn't arranged to meet a friend, I wouldn't see anybody. So I might not see anyone for 3 days. And my mood would go down so much. I need interaction with people. And that's social media for me. That's the great thing about it. It's that interaction, that discussion that you can have all the time.
And that's one of the high points, really, of social media. Yeah. It connects and addresses against loneliness. Thanks so much for sharing. That's all for this week's episode of Superbrain. For regular updates and bonus material, follow Superbrain Podcast and Sabina Brennan on Instagram, and at Sabina_Brennan on Twitter. Subscribe to Superbrain on Acast, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, if you loved it, rate it, review it, and share it.